3.5, we're going to be graphing square root and cube root graphs. Here is a basic graph of a square root. And you can plug this into the calculator to see. And here is a basic graph of a cube root. Okay, now when we're talking about domain and range, which is going to be the hardest part for you in this section, is remember in Algebra 1, domain is all of your x values. So what is your x values doing? So if you look, it starts at 0, and it does include it. So we're going to put the line underneath of the greater or less than sign. And all of these x values keep getting bigger. So it's got to be more than or equal to 0. And the range is asking what are all your y values doing in this graph. This also starts at 0. And the graph is slowly going up. So that is going to be more than or equal to 0. So there's domain and range of that function there. Over here we have a cube root graph. And the domain and range is very simple. Because if you notice the x values, you look at the range or the domain, the x values, the graph is going in the positive direction and in the negative direction. So we're going to say all real numbers. And then the y, the graph is going up and is going down. So that's also all real numbers. So anytime that you have a graph that looks like this, it'll always be all real numbers for domain and range. All right, example 1. We're going to graph and state the domain and range, which is exactly what the book tells you to do. And here is a function that we're going to graph. And you can go through and make your x and y chart if you don't have a calculator, which will take longer, but if you do have a calculator, plug it in. So we're going to go to the y equals, clear anything that's in there, -4 square root of x. Push graph. And that is what I see. So what I want you to do is sketch it on your paper. And then to get the domain and range, we're going to go second table. See how it says error, 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 error until you get to here? That's because the graph starts at 0, 0, and then it goes positive in the x direction and negative for the y. So what we're gonna do is we're going to copy that graph down and keep in mind what the values were. So I have the x and y chart over here, and it started at 0, 0, and all these numbers kept getting more negative. Okay, I'm not going to keep writing those. Okay, so when we talk about domain, we are asking ourselves what are the y or the x values doing. It starts at 0 and it gets bigger, more than or equal to 0. Range, we're going to look at the y values. Starts at 0 and it gets smaller, so less than or equal to 0. And then you're done. All right, here's another example. Okay, so we're going to plug this into our graph. which was -4/5, so we want to put the parenthesis around the fraction. Square root of x. And we're going to sketch the graph. And you can see it right there. And you're going to use your table to figure out what you should do. So on here you can tell the graph does start at 0, 0. And your x numbers get bigger, and your y values get smaller because it keeps going negative, negative, smaller numbers as you go down the list. So the domain has to be bigger than 0 or equal to it. In the range is all the numbers smaller than or equal to 0. So kind of the same domain and range for this graph as well. Okay, now we have a cube root graph, and you're going to go to your y equals again, and you're going to punch it in. So we have 2 cube root now, so we have to push math and go down to number 4 of x. And here's the sketch of our graph. And I like these because the domain and range, again, is all real numbers. It covers both positive and negative sides of x and y. So in your homework, you would sketch it and write domain, range, all real numbers.